Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. Now, before we get to today's program, don't forget about our Fresh Off the Vine fundraising drive. To support programming like Pathways, go to kboo.fm/give or text the letters KBOO to 44321 to become a monthly sustaining member. It only takes a minute to show your support for community-powered radio. That website again is kboo.fm/give. We need and thank you for your support. Well, today we're going to have another show about psychedelics, and psychedelic experiences, as we're learning, have the power to heal, inspire, and liberate the human mind, body, and soul. But these substances are only as powerful as our ability to understand, integrate, and support them. And today's guest works to contributing toward building a society where psychedelic experiences, education, and strong communities necessary to process them are accessible to all. Our guest today is Tom Hatsis, Executive Director of Psanctum, a nonprofit psychedelic education and harm reduction organization located in Portland, Oregon. Psanctum Thrift is a project of Psanctum, which is the first nonprofit thrift store to align itself with and contribute to the growing field of psychedelic-assisted therapy, a form of treatment that can address the root causes that lead many people to paths of addiction, not to mention PTSD, depression, and anxiety, and at times, houselessness. Tom is a psychedelic historian and author of The Witches Ointment, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, Microdosing Magic, and LSD, the Wonderchild. When not studying psychedelics, Tom enjoys employing them in witchcraft and personal alchemy. Hello, Tom, and welcome to the Pathway Show.
Hey, Paulo, always great to talk to you.
Now, we want to talk about Psanctum and the Psanctum Thrift Store, but first, let's start out by finding more about you, its co-founder. How did you get into this psychedelic realm?
Well, I've been interested in psychedelics my entire adult life. I've been studying them for about 25 or so years, 23 to 25 years. And it all began when I was 18 years old. I had my first, I believe it was a half-eighth of mushrooms, and I was just blown away by it, and not even such a large dose. I mean, half an eighth really isn't all that much, but it's still, I felt like I had touched something just special, something that I think a lot of us have always been looking for or thought might be out there and just couldn't find anywhere. And then I ate those mushrooms and I was like, oh, here it is.
Uh-huh.
So I've been in love since then.
When you say half an eighth, an eighth of an ounce, or what's an eighth?
An eighth is 3.5 grams.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I had about 1.5 grams or so.
I see.
Again, a relatively low dose, but still enough to open the doors for me.
And how does that compare to the dosages that people are receiving through psychedelic-assisted therapy now that it's legal?
It would be a lower dose, I believe, than people are receiving now. I believe they receive between 2 to 3 grams. So mine was a little bit lower.
Okay. And tell us about the books that you've written. Can you kind of describe each of them and how they relate to each other and to your work in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first book was called The Witches Ointment, which details how medieval wise women were unfairly targeted as quote unquote witches. And one of their practices involved having what we today would call entheogenic experiences. Now, they didn't have the word entheogen back then. It was only coined in, I believe, 1979. But had that word existed, that's the word people would have used. These women would rub their bodies with ointments made out of things like henbane, mandrake, opium, belladonna. And in some cases, we have one account from the early 1600s that these people were also using psychedelic mushrooms. So what my book does is goes over how the church demonized these women as witches when they were really just healers and shamans. My second book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, sort of covers the breadth of psychedelia in Western civilization. We're all very familiar with psychedelic use amongst First Nations peoples, but a lot of folks don't realize that Western civilization also has psychedelic traditions that go back thousands of years. Now, they weren't using things like peyote and ayahuasca, but they were using things like cannabis, opium, and mushrooms. Microdosing Magic is a sort of a little practical manual I wrote for people interested in using magical and witchcraft sort of techniques with their microdosing regime. And my last book was called LSD, The Wonderchild, which it's a history of the 1950s when LSD wasn't seen as this, as it later came to be called, a horror child. But during the 50s, they actually called it a wonder child. So I wanted to sort of show that these medicines had been successfully used in the United States and Western Europe during the 50s to heal people.
Uh-huh. So how do you differentiate in your own mind, or do you think it's a significant difference whether a psychedelic substance is derived from a plant like mushrooms or in a laboratory like LSD or MDMA?
Yeah, that's a great question. My thing is that whatever works for the person, whether it's natural or synthetic, is fine with me. The only area where I would part company with that opinion would be with 5-MeO-DMT, because in order to extract the 5-MeO-DMT from the toad, the Sonora desert toad, you kind of have to torture it, which I'm not down with at all. So the synthetic form means that the cute little toads can be left alone, and it's actually far more stable than the toad medicine. The synthetic form is it's easier to measure out doses, safe doses, and again, most importantly, it doesn't harm any animals. So I think there's nuance. With mushrooms, I like going to the coast and picking my own mushrooms and eating those, because all of that, the foraging is part of the spiritual experience for me. However, I'm not going to go out and harm a toad in the same way, so I would go for the synthetic 5-MeO-DMT.
I see. Uh-huh. And is DMT what's the relationship between, I know DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, and ayahuasca basically was just a way that we could get DMT through an oral, taking it orally, because straight DMT, I guess you can't take it orally. I've never done it, but I mean, you smoke it or something like that. But so DMT's inherent to ayahuasca, but is it also related to mushrooms and other psychedelics?
No.
Okay.
Tryptamines are their own sort of class.
Mhm.
Yeah, the psilocybin mushrooms are a different thing.
And okay, tell us about witchcraft, because a lot of people, are confused about witchcraft, and, they haven't read your books, and you practice witchcraft. What does that mean? And does that make you a warlock?
No, I go by the word witch. The term witch, the Latin word lamia is interchangeable. Men were called witches, women were called witches. Warlock was more of a modern word. It came later because I guess people wanted to, how we have to genderize everything,
Right.
we got to do that. So I just go with the word witch because that feels, I don't know, more natural to me. Warlock, and it never, I don't know. It just never stuck with me. But psychedelic witchcraft, which is what I involve myself with, has to do with the worship of goddesses and eating mushrooms in their honor, drinking ayahuasca in their honor, smoking cannabis in their honor. And psychedelic witchcraft is a sort of a mixture of ancient Gnosticism ancient mystery religion, and medieval witchcraft, all
Okay.
sort of rolled into one.
And
Very
what
syncretistic religion.
and how do you practice as a witch?
So, I mean, I have just different rituals, or what we call witchuals, that I do. For example, on most nights, I didn't last night just because I was kind of busy, but most nights I'll do my Amanita Muscaria ritual before bed for dream divination. And I'll call out to the three main goddesses of my pantheon, being Gaia, Hecate, and Circe, all for different reasons. You know, I'll cast a magical circle, I'll burn the incenses, I'll take the mushrooms, I'll offer up the mushrooms to the goddess. It's stuff like that.
I see. Uh-huh. And do you have like ceremonies with groups, or you invite people in for rituals on special occasions?
Sometimes. I mean, Eden, you know, Eden, my business and creative partner, she
Right.
and I will do witchcraft together, and I'll have what I call love parties, which are MDMA and mushroom parties, and just a small group of people, around, you know, 10 to a dozen, and we'll imbibe the sacraments and do some witchy stuff.
I see. Okay, cool. All right. So now, we're in this very special time now where there are legal changes coming down the pike that make psychedelic assisted therapies legally possible. Tell us about that, and tell us about Measure 109.
Yeah, great. Excellent. So in 2020, two ballot measures passed in the state of Oregon. One was Measure 109, which made psilocybin therapy kind of legal. It's kind of in a gray area. It's not federally legal. It's sort of legal in the states, but only in the legal facilities. So like a
Right.
mushroom outside the facility is still illegal. Mushroom inside the facility is legal. So one of the things that came with Measure 109 was a sort of a high ticket price for these medicines, and the price has to do with insurance. I mean, overhead. I mean, this is all very experimental. So part of me can understand sort of where the price comes from. I think there might be a little bit of gouging in there, but the point is, Eden and I didn't want to despair about any of this. We wanted to try to help. And so we started Psanctum Thrift, which is our thrift store, which I'm in my office in the thrift store right now. And what we do is donations and sales from the store go into our psychedelic therapy access fund. And we're working now to build that fund. It should take about 7 or 8 months or so. We're hoping, if we meet our projected goals, that we could start the application process for people who want to receive money for psilocybin therapy if they have financial barriers. So that's only who this is for. Our application process works similarly to Planned Parenthood's, in that it's based on income.
I see.
And so, yeah, if somebody comes in and they're making 6 figures a year, sorry, we're not giving you money, you can afford it. This is for people, specifically people who have been historically marginalized and kept out of these conversations, and sort of kept out of the psychedelic renaissance. And, this movement is supposed to be about all of us. And so Psanctum Thrift is here to ensure that people who want to have this kind of experience are not going to be left outside the door just because they don't have the finances to afford it.
Right. Okay, so let's put this in context. I mean, the way things are structured now, in order to have this experience of a psilocybin assisted therapy session, you have to do it through an agency that's accredited, blah, blah, blah. You have to go in and do it on site somewhere. What does it normally run for somebody, regardless of what their income is or whatever? What's the normal rate?
The normal rate is about $3,000, and that includes the sort of the pre-op, for lack of a better way of putting it, the session itself, and then the integration that follows, which is the most important part of the experience, is the integration afterward. So again, I can see partially how I could see how some of the price is justified, but other aspects of it I can't. For example, I was at Eden and I were at an unconf. I keep pointing this way because as if Eden's right here, but she's not. We were at a an unconference on Saturday, and one of the psilocybin policy analysts was there. And one of the questions I get all the time is about the price, and so I brought up that question. And one of the things he said about it that I strongly disagree with, again, I understand insurance, understand overhead, I understand there has to be somebody to mop the floors, keep the place clean. But then he said, and also, if you go see an accountant, you're expected to pay to see that accountant. And that may very well be true. I'm not very well, it is true. The difference is eating mushrooms is a natural right. Seeing an accountant is not a natural right. So I don't think that that's an apt comparison. So whatever chunk of money people are saying, well, here's my, accountant fee or whatever, maybe you cut that in half a little bit, because people have a natural right to these mushrooms. And it's not fair that it's like, okay, so the law says you can't eat mushrooms outside this facility. And the law also sort of says you can eat mushrooms in this facility, but for a high price. And it's like, well, what about all the people who want to eat mushrooms but can't foot the bill? So again, Sanctum
But
Thrift.
okay, so you maintain that it's our natural right to
Oh, absolutely.
plant substances, but that's not the way the laws are, But
Yeah.
let's say that psychedelic substances were decriminalized. That would make a lot of difference, because then people could take them on their own or find their own supportive resources. What?
But if I may real quick, decriminalization is also a little bit of BS, because the idea is, okay, well, mushrooms are just not a priority. Like, that's what decriminalization means. It means law enforcement, they're not going to prioritize it. All right, fine. But what about when they do arrest somebody for having mushrooms on them? I mean, you can still get arrested in Oregon for that. And this is your natural right to eat mushrooms. So they should just be, I mean, I don't even know what the term would be, but they should be like tomatoes in your vegetable garden. I mean, they're not decriminalized, they're not illegal, they're not legal, they're just tomatoes growing in your garden. Well, mushrooms grow naturally all over this state. It's one of the reasons I live here. And I mean, you have a natural right to go pick up anything you want and put it in your body. You just do.
Right. Well, I couldn't agree with you more, but that's not the way the law is structured. It's just crazy. Okay, so let's just say your natural rights were honored, and these things were not illegal. None of these things were illegal. What are they equivalent? We've got psilocybin, we've got LSD, we've got ketamine, we've got MDMA, we've got ayahuasca. How do you know which one is the best for you if you're interested in getting some benefit from psychedelic assisted experience?
So that's a great question. And I think that just comes down to the individual. Like, I prefer mushrooms, Eden prefers LSD. As far as something like ayahuasca is kind of special because she will call out to you. If you're supposed to drink ayahuasca, she is going to tap you and be like, you got to drink me. So that's kind of really how, it's just, you sort of figure it out. I mean, they're all relatively safe as long as you don't do something irresponsible on them. And that's sort of why the clinics are there. And I'm not against the clinics, by the way. I think they're a good thing. Not everybody wants to, is as cavalier as I am and wants to go out into the woods and eat mushrooms and hug trees and roll around in the dirt and do witchcraft. Some people really want that clinical experience, which is why we support it. And getting back to your question, since mushrooms are physiologically safe, that is a pretty good place to start, especially if you're new to it and you've never, tried psilocybin before. Then taking, these very safe mushrooms in a very safe clinical environment, I think that's a really good thing. So there are parts of me that absolutely are supportive of these clinics. Not everyone likes to eat mushrooms the way I do. and they should have that option.
Okay, so in terms of the clinic experience, therapeutically, what is psilocybin best suited for?
Psilocybin is best suited for sort of digging out. I mean, to use witchy and magical terms, I would say shadow work. But in clinical terms, you'd say things like trauma therapy.
Okay, trauma therapy. All right.
Yeah, because mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, mescaline, peyote, they cause in some people what is known in psychological circles as abreaction, which is when a long forgotten memory sort of bubbles up to the fore of your conscious mind. It's one of the most useful and fascinating things about them is how far back into your memory you can go, you know.
What other psychedelic, other than psilocybin, what other psychedelics have become legal for therapy?
So ketamine is legal for therapy and has been for a while. Now, some people don't consider ketamine psychedelic. I do personally. Some people don't. They consider a dissociative, but I just consider dissociatives a family of the larger psychedelic umbrella.
Right. Okay.
And MDMA is probably going to be the first one that's federally legal. Like before ketamine, before psilocybin, and way before LSD. I mean, I don't even think that's on the docket yet. But MDMA in probably another couple of years is going to be federally legal, across the board for therapy.
And so do you see these psychedelic clinics starting to offer that when that happens, as in
I
addition
would
to
imagine.
psilocybin? Yeah.
Yeah, because getting back to your question is how do you know which one, to use? If somebody, let's say they tried LSD as a teenager or early 20s, now they're in their 40s or so, and they want to try it again, but the only option is mushrooms. Well, if LSD joins mushrooms in, the clinical sort of legal gray area, that'll give that person the option to go with LSD instead. Which I think, more options, more choices for more people is always the better way to go.
Right. And you are, you've kind of dedicated, is this your life's work? I mean, educating
Yes.
people about psychedelics. And right now you've got a thing, it's part of the Psanctum org, is your Psychedelic Education Center.
Yeah.
And I was reading on your website that it's currently archiving the last materials of the Timothy Leary collection.
Yeah.
What is the Timothy Leary collection?
What's that?
What is the Timothy Leary
Oh,
collection?
so what we have are the last 34 boxes that were in Timothy Leary's house when he transcended this world into the next. So it's a lot of newspaper clippings, books, records. We have his wallet. We have one of his unpaid parking tickets. Some flyers back from the 1960s when they were giving, LSD and mushroom trials. There's a lot of cool stuff in there.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, that sounds great. And so do people like go to your location in Milwaukee to get access to these materials or
Well, we're digitizing all of it, and you could find it on our website, which is Psanctum, PSANCTUM.org. And if people,
Sanctum.org?
yeah, at the shop though, we do have a little museum glass that has Leary's wallet, the famous Life magazine article from 1957 where Robert Gordon Wasson met Maria Sabina and ate mushrooms for the first time. So some of the items in the collection are in the shop for people to view, but the articles and stuff, the newspaper clippings, of which there's thousands of them, those are all kept in a secret location, and one box at a time is brought here to the education center to go through digitizing.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. Now, do you see any role in the future that, a legalized role for what they call sitters or people who might, sit in with you when you do a psychedelic experience just for the sake of, making it safe and comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole underground network of psychedelic sitters. So
Okay.
you can, depending on who if you're like, oh, I want to try some mushrooms, but whatever, my spouse isn't going to be around that weekend to just sort of watch over me and to trip sit. So you could actually find people. I mean, I've done it sort of spontaneously back in my roller derby days. Sometimes we'd be at after parties and after parties and after parties, and people would take a little too much of something, and they'd always be like, him, that guy, meaning me, like, get him to protect this person, because he knows what he's doing.
Right.
So,
Okay.
I've impromptu been a sitter myself.
Well, we're just about running out of time, and I want to make sure to ask you, how can Portlanders get involved with Psanctum?
Sure. So there's lots of ways to get involved with Psanctum. First and foremost, if you are interested in supporting the mission of helping people access psilocybin therapy who have financial barriers, and let's say you're moving or you're downsizing, instead of taking your stuff to Goodwill, take it to 4033 Southeast Milwaukee Boulevard, which is the Psanctum Thrift shop, because if you take your stuff to Goodwill, that's just going to go into the pockets of corporate assholes. Oh, wait, could I say asshole? Corporate a-holes. If you bring your stuff to Psanctum Thrift, your donations and your purchases become money for marginalized people to access psilocybin and ketamine-assisted therapy. So that's one way to get involved.
And so people go ahead.
No, what's that?
What's another way?
Oh, another way would be come down to the Psanctum open mic. It's every Monday night at the Haven. That's 819 Southeast Taylor Street. It's a really good time. It's a pretty large open mic, has a really, really awesome vibe, and it will be unlike any open mic you've ever been to. Promise.
I'm sure. That sounds great. That's on Monday nights.
That's on Monday nights.
Hey, well, thank you. Oh, I was just going to say there's so much more we could explore, but we've run out of time.
Yeah, can I plug one more thing?
Go ahead.
Sorry. October 15th. Actually, wait, I should. Never mind. We'll just let it go.
Okay. Hey, well, like I said, we've run out of time. Thank you very much. I want to be sure to repeat your website for people to learn more on how they can support your cause and how they can learn more about psychedelics. And that's psanctum.org. That's spelled starting with a P, like psychedelics, psanctum.org. And for those who may have tuned into Pathways late, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, author of Intuitive Intelligence, a book that shares the theme of Pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. And don't worry, you can play and or share this interview anytime you want via the internet as a free podcast. And I will tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Thomas Hatsis, Executive Director and co-founder of Psanctum at psanctum.org and at the thrift store in Milwaukee. I really want to encourage our listeners to pitch in. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into the show today, which is broadcast and streamed on the internet at www.kboo.fm every Sunday morning at 8:30 Pacific time. And even better, podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com, spelled D-I-V-I, nation.com, as well as via iTunes, Paulo's YouTube channel, and other free podcast servers. This is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And remember to help KBOO reach our $55,000 membership drive goal by showing your support today at kboo.fm/give or by texting KBOO to 44321. Every donation helps keep KBOO on the air to bring you fresh off the vine programming like Pathways. 80% of KBOO's budget comes from listeners like you, so please consider becoming a member and supporting independent, community-supported, volunteer-powered radio. And thanks again to Tom Hatsis and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.